so that we can get the class started. Good afternoon from Jos. Good morning, wherever you are. It's pretty early where Lowell is. Yeah.
Well, I'm in the middle of the country in Phoenix. So now I'm going to get back to.
Yeah, just change your name so that we know who you are. So good morning, everyone. This is our week 7, right? Week 7, yes. And we are welcome. I'm really excited, today to have Dr. Lowell Bakke with us. And I sent a quick, maybe like a 2-sentence sort of introduction of Lowell Bakke to us. Many of us might have met him and he has a particular sort of connection with the Korean team. The article that was sent out this week was actually written to a Korean audience. And we're really excited to have Dr. Lowell here today. He represents a lot of things to me personally. Our journey started way back, I think 2008, when we met physically in South Africa. And it's been a wonderful journey ever since. I've always loved challenges. And now when you meet someone who gives you challenges in full measure, then there's some sort of connection. He's been my counselor, my advisor, my professor. I managed to score a very good grade in the course that I did with him. But Dr. Lowell is a better friend. And we've been in that kind of relationship for quite a while. And it's been very fulfilling. He is Mr. Theology of Work, if you want to put it, it would be appropriate to put it that way. He sent me to a lot of places that has been very fulfilling to go and teach theology of work, to discuss theology of work. And it's really very exciting to have him here today. He's the current director of, the Theology of Work, International Theology of Work grant of the Mustard Seed Foundation. And this session is a follow-up to what we did last week, which is workplace culture. And we know that in the workplace today, there are a lot of debates going on, especially as it has to do with gender. And work is stretching a lot of people today because of the impact of COVID on family, on other forms of relationship, particularly on faith, which is what this course is all about. These are many other things. It's what Dr. Lowell will be walking us through today. And just like I did with the session we had with Dr. Dave Haytage, it's about story. Life transformation comes out of stories, good stories, life experiences. The Bible is a compilation of how God expresses life through humans. And that's why I've titled this session, The Power of Stories. And so it's going to be stories and interactions, questions. So I'm just going to leave the floor for Dr. Lowell to just walk us through what he has in mind for us today. Let's make a good welcome for Dr. Bakke.
Well, well, it's good to hear from you. Can you hear me? Okay, all of you hear me all right? All right,
yep.
Great. Just seen the group. I'm sure you're from various parts of Korea and other parts of the world. So it would help me if you, I see Jamaica there, Korea. Where other locations are we coming from today?
Singapore.
Singapore, wonderful.
Wisconsin.
All right.
Apofia is from Uganda. That's right. And,
where in Uganda?
Kampala.
Kampala, that's the capital.
Kampala, wonderful. Well, story is much a part of this, and I'll try to make it as much of a story as possible. Have you had a chance to read and go through the PowerPoint? Did you ever read the article, go through the PowerPoint? I love your feedback on these things as we go along. My main concern with theology of work is that theology of work is not a workplace issue. I want to make sure you understand that. Theology of work is a lifestyle issue.
Hmm.
It is not something that you do in a location. It's something you live as you incarnationally enter into every location. And I think if we start with that premise, that God created us to enter into the world incarnationally, the very same way he created Jesus to enter into the world incarnationally. And to enter into the world incarnationally, you have to do that with a theology of work. And if you do that, then it affects every aspect of your life. So, what I'd like to do is to just introduce the first part of the PowerPoint. It won't take us long to do that. I did this in Korea, and it helped me understand what was going on in Korea. And so now, can you? Is this shared?
Yeah, I'm sharing it from here.
Okay,
Yes.
shared. Okay. Let's just skip down to the fourth slide, if you would. We don't need to go through. Just flip down to that fourth slide. I can't slide it, so yeah. The
So
fourth.
is that the one you want?
Right here. That's the fourth slide. It
Fourth
says, yeah, the fourth slide.
The one that talks about Philippians 4?
Yeah, I know.
All
The
right.
one after that. There we go. No, next slide.
Okay.
Next slide, please.
Okay.
And it's not, there we go. Okay. One of the things that I think is important to understand is the Bible connects the stories. They're not disconnected stories. They are connected stories. And when you get the connections of stories and the connections of what God has been doing, what he is doing, and what he will do, if you connect those, you have a pretty good idea of what the will of God is in your own life and in the life of others. What I want you to realize that when the Spirit of God was poured out and I think that took place at Pentecost, there were going to be issues that were going to be addressed. And that is ethnic cleansing, or no more. There was going to move to ethnic reconciliation, because the whole Old Testament are stories of ethnic cleansing. One location, one family, one tribe against the other. And with the cross and the end of the curse, now we have an opportunity to rethink. And when the Spirit was going to pour out on us, there would be a move to ethnic reconciliation, which I think, after 15 years of watching people in Africa particularly address theology of work and take that into their workspace, they have done that through bringing reconciliation to the forefront. Doughton's doctoral dissertation was on the Muslim Christian conflict, and how theology of work was the only place that would bring, only space where he could bring reconciliation together. And you have Samuel Maduma in Kenya, and you have Tanzania, and Samuel Kargwu in Sierra Leone, who has done an amazing job in bringing reconciliation. Then you go into even a place like Rwanda and the Congo, and there you have one of our other key teachers there, um, who has brought reconciliation to the forefront. When you apply theology of work, you're going to see ethnic reconciliation take place. So it's not just about the workspace, it's about relationships and the relationships within the workplace. In Asia, one of the early theology of work books was called "Taking Taking Your Soul to Work" by Paul Stevens, and that book was done by he and a student of his from Singapore, and they were looking at the workplace, but they were working at how do you bring reconciliation. And what they discovered, the only place that people could talk in that Malaysia and Singapore, and I think he was not from, excuse me, he was from Malaysia, not from Singapore, but in that process, it was at the workplace they could talk, the workplace they could communicate without fear in a society that was 90% Muslim and 10%, 9% Christian. That's one. The second part that's going to happen, and anytime you connect stories in the Old Testament and the New Testament, you connect ethnic stories with gender stories. It's about women and men. And when you look at the text and the place of women, women have, since the fall, have been under men. So God placed the man and put the wife underneath as a way. And it says in Genesis 3:18 that the wife would want her husband would want to be, and it wasn't she was romantically looking at her husband. She wanted the space that her husband had, the same space that they had in Genesis 1 and 2. They were co-equals in this process. And the cross made that possible, to take, instead of being under here, now there's a way in which men and women can work collectively together. And that's offensive often to Christians in my culture. Americans love to have a New Testament cross that gets you ready for heaven, but they have an Old Testament lifestyle that puts man in charge of women. And I think the kingdom is not that way. The kingdom is that we were created equally to work together, and if you don't have that partnership in that, you're not going to achieve everything that God wants to be achieved. And the third area is the generation gap. That from one generation to another, it's my astute, brilliant observation that each generation shows up and thinks there's the first generation that has any sense. We're the ones who finally figured it out, and nothing that's gone on before has any sense whatsoever. And especially with Christians, pastors are really great at saying, when I'm arrived, now I speak for God. And everything in the past, well, that was okay, but the Spirit of God has shown up with me. When you apply theology of work, the theology of what God called us to be, you're going to have generations that can work together. People from one generation to the next can build upon and can continue to do the work that had God begun. My favorite first verse I ever memorized was, "He hath begun the good work in you, will continue to do it until the day of Christ's return." Well, I realized that God didn't just begin with me. I had to go back and who was I connecting with? Okay. Those three areas, I think, what we've seen in theology of work courses around the world, that the ethnicity issue, the gender issue, and the whole generational issue have been addressed by various teachers. And Joel said that was going to happen. And I think that's the effect, really, of what theology work can do. When you enter into any space, you're going to deal with these three and other problems, but these three major ones. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? Okay, no questions? No comments?
Any questions, comments?
I have one question and one comment.
Okay.
Yes.
That's Patrick.
Right. Yes. So Dr. Bakke, really great. I read the article that was sent out, was really great. And even this small piece of your presentation, really awesome. As we look at the generational issue, because that's my main focus as a youth leader. So I currently lead youth leaders who are in charge of youth ministry. And I find that there has always been this big gap in our denomination or within the Brethren churches in the context of older folks and our generation. There's a big gap because of how it is that they view church, how it is that they see service, they see discipleship, they see how we are, or their thoughts of how we are designed to live out our calling. And as I face that daily, I am conscious of the fact that because I did a course earlier in ABCD that speaks to that we must always see what God has already started within the space and the context of where we are trying to serve. However, what I find hard is because a lot of youths have been faced with somewhat disrespect, somewhat being just bashful from older folks. How do we help bridge that gap? How can we come from a place of seeing what God has already started, where in our own carnal eyes, all that we are seeing is maybe hurt and disunity and so on?
Well, my brother Ray is a historian and has said over and over that if you don't know where you've been, quit kidding yourself that you can tell us where to go. If you don't know what God has done, you cannot understand what God is going to do in the future. And part of the problem is that in our churches, as well as in our schools, we have focused on what was bad, not what was good. And we focused on what we don't have, not what we do have. You know, so we're constantly, instead of saying, you know, what is the good today that God has done? What is the good in each generation? When I went into an old dying church and I worked with old and dying churches, the first thing I would do is ask them to go back and put together a history of their church. And where did God show up in that history of that church by decade? And what were the issues that they had to face in that decade? I came from a Swedish Baptist church, even though I'm a Norwegian, and I was in this Swedish Baptist church. This Swedish Baptist church was dying. But when we went back and discovered that this Swedish Baptist church was the only Swedish Baptist church founded in the US between 1912 and 1943, the only one. We were founded in 1920. We were founded in the midst of a Japanese culture. The truck farmers had moved in, and the church went from Swedish to Japanese before it went from Swedish to English, which was really fascinating. They started the first first Japanese Sunday school in the state of Washington. Now, that didn't make sense to a lot of people, but to me it did. Because the culture, when you know what happened during World War II, and you know what happened to Japanese in the US in World War II, they were all put into incarceration camps. And we've discovered that in our city, in our town that where our church was in, was the first incarceration camp for Japanese people. And it was in that camp that our church, little Norwegian or Swedish church, served as the food agent for that camp. Our church provided food for those who were incarcerated in that camp. All of a sudden, we had a purpose in life as a church. We could go back and say, what was it like for the heroes to change their language from Swedish to take in the ethnic group of Japan, who were in to provide food for us. And when we took over the camps and they took over their farms and put them into concentration camps, as it were, they said for their own protection, which I would question mightily. But that our church found that they were heroic. And so we had a hall of fame of people who had to live by faith, who had to change what they were doing. And we went through every generation, every 10 years, decade, to try to explain that. God has been at work. How do we add that? So in 1999, when our city blew up with racial tension, we sold our church to an African American congregation, and we moved my offices and the offices of our staff into the church. And for 2 years, while we were looking for a new facility, the pastor and I went everywhere together. We needed an African American congregation in our church, in our city, small town, small city. And it was because of what we did way back in 1921 that we brought it to 1999. Mm. And our kids who were in the schools where it was broken, they led the reconciliation movement in the public schools. Why? Wow. Because they heard it from the church. Wow. They heard that we had been here before. They heard that this is what God placed us there to do. And they had to pick up and said, it's going to take as much faith from you to come alongside African Americans as it was going to take that faith from the Swedish people way back in 1920 to take on the love of Japanese people. Does that make sense to you? You've got to go back and teach history based upon what is it that God has done, and how does that affect the way we're doing it today. God is still in the ethnic issues, and that's why connecting stories in the Bible are really important. And we'll show that even in a family. But that's good question. I think we need to do more of that. We need to make heroes out of people who gone before us, who by faith have stepped into space and in generational issues, they've done wonderful things. We just need to open our mind to see those stories. Wow. You have to study it and bring it apart in your community as well. Does that make sense to you, Patrick?
Definitely. Thank you so much, Doctor. Really appreciate that about you.
Yeah, great. Any other questions? I'm chatting with Suni. If there's any question from the Korean, brothers and sisters there, so that Patrick, that's very profound because as an African, I can tell you that one of the areas where we've been so weakened is in the area of history, because bulk of our history wasn't written by us. So we have to be able to take another look at it and sift through that history to really squeeze out what reality really is. for your context is so critical, because a lot of your young people are more Western than Caribbean. So they need to know exactly where they're coming from. And that conversation needs to happen. You need to listen to them to know where they are. Yeah. And then you need to be able to go back and tell them, this is how we got to where we are, before you can actually make that connection. A lot of them, the young people that you lead, they don't speak the same language with their parents. They can't share the same kind of experience. They don't watch the same kind of movie. It happens everywhere. So from the home to church, even now to workplace, where you have people who are bosses, they are either very young or very old. And when you have the two generations in the boardroom, they're just speaking different languages. And it becomes more complex when you begin to talk about a multiracial kind of, I said last week that if you walk the street of London today, you're not likely to hear English spoken. You're not likely to hear English. You hear Chinese, you hear, Malay, you hear all those kind of things on the street of London. And it's happening in every city. So history is so critical. A lot of your generation also, Patrick, I don't know how well versed the history of your region that you have. So that's a very critical point. Any other questions for Lowell? This is how we're going to run with this. If Lowell wants to go back to the presentation, we'll go there. But, from the article, I again made a mistake. I should have sent the PowerPoint way ahead of time. Yep.
Okay, let's go to that PowerPoint again.
All right, cool.
And I want to keep going to the end of this PowerPoint to keep going right there to the kingdom. Yeah, entering into the kingdom. I want one right before the king. Right, one right before that. So we just touch base on it for just a second. Okay. I think that God created 4 institutions. He created the institution of business or work. He created the institution of government. He created the institution of the church, and he created the institution of the family. 4 basic institutions. The family and work were created in Genesis 1 and 2, before the fall. Government and the church were created after the fall. They were to work with the other 2 institutions. What I see happening in the world today is we have mocked the institutions of God. The church has and often said, we're the institution that God works with. Everything goes through the church. It's the church. Evangelicals have been great at this, have said, it's God works with the church today. I'm sorry, God created 4 institutions and one is not more important than the other. The call of business, of stewarding all of the resources of God in Genesis 1 and 2 is as alive today as it was before the fall. The government of God is on the shoulder of Jesus, and government is today a huge part of what God intended in our world. The church is a vital part of this. There's always been a collective body in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, and it's absolutely vital. But it doesn't replace the family. The family has always been key to what goes on in the world. God starts at the beginning. In the beginning, he created man and woman. He created family. Families became the focal point before the fall, and what started in the letter I wrote to you, it said what started in the bedroom went to the playroom, with Cain and Abel, then went to the boardroom at the Tower of Babel, and then went to the war room for the rest of the Old Testament as one tribe went against another tribe for dominance. Who's in charge? Who's in charge in the bedroom with a man and wife went to who's in charge in the playroom with which kid was most important, went to which which garden was going to be the most important, my garden or your garden. The Tower of Babel was a symbol of the whole corporate mentality of location. This location is my location. I'm not leaving this location. And I've often said if man did not sin in the garden by eating fruit, they would have sinned when God said, I want you now to go to another garden and start another garden and build that to maturity. You were never intended to be in a garden forever. Yeah. You were intended to take a garden and build it and then move to the next garden and build it to fulfillment. The gospel was about movement. The good news of God from the beginning was, I'm going to start in one location, but I'm going to move you all around so that my whole world hears of me and sees what the kingdom is going to be about when I'm in charge. Does that make sense to you? If you don't connect those dots, then you will become anti-migrant. You'll become anti-immigration. In the US, we're anti-migrant and anti-immigration. That's what it's been the last few years. Why? Because it's been about me. This is my kingdom. This is my place. And the evangelical church has bought into it. We have taken on an anti-immigrant, anti-migrant voice. And yet the whole purpose of building something great was so that we could move on to build something else great and leave what we had behind without having to control it, without having to own it, because it was God's. When you take God out of the equation, then each little place becomes the most important place in the world. Rather than a launching pad to the rest of the world, it becomes a fortress to protect. And all the way through history, you have fortress protection going on because you don't have a theology of work. You don't understand what God's called us to do. So these four institutions, my question to you, just on what you know about theology of work in your context, is which area of business, government, church, or family, which area was theology of work most effective in, or has it been most effective in the past? What you know about theology of work, how's it worked in your businesses in your country, your government, your church, and your family? Which one? Where's it been most effective?
Great.
Who wants to start? Give me an answer.
I'll start. I think, at least from my viewpoint, I would say business has been probably the most impacted. Has been most
Why
effective.
Is
that? Because they're putting in place biblical principles often creates a better environment, which a work environment which tends to be more profitable or has other issues. So there's some incentive to, they may not call them biblical principles, but applying those principles gives businesses an ability to thrive in a way that maybe their competition doesn't, where the church and the family and the government are mired in tradition.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah, I agree too.
Anyone else? Other perspective?
Yeah, one of the questions said that it's applied to more of church.
What was that?
Yeah, one Korean student responded that in his case is effective in the church.
It's affected in church. Why?
Yeah.
Why in the church, Sunil?
I need to hear it. I need to hear from him.
Sunil is actually he's the one doing the translation for the Korean student.
Yeah, because,
He's actually reading something that one of the students said. Yeah.
Because he's trying to teach the theology work in the church.
Yes. Okay, that's wonderful.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Yes. I'm Daniel.
Yes,
Okay,
Daniel.
Yeah. Dr. Bakke, I think, this depends on whether you have control. I think that is most important because so in that respect, I think family. Because, family is the place where I can rule over everything according to what I believe.
Yes.
So at least I can try and I can do the thing I really believe is true. And also in the same way, if I own the company, for example, that means that I do have full control over that institution, then I think the business might be the best or most effective part. But in reality, that is not realistic because usually we are employee, not the owner of the company. So that is very challenging situation. And also at the same time, yeah.
What would happen if you said your employer is not the owner of the company? In fact, God is.
Yeah.
Does that change? You're not in control. They're not in control. God is in control. Would that change the perspective at all?
That's right. Yeah, but despite, yeah, of course, but from my side, yeah, what I can do is to do my best to please God, though there might be some kind of conflict between what I want to do and what the owner of the company really want me to do.
Right.
Yeah, but when I move to family, at least I am the boss of the family.
So now we're going to get into this gender stuff and being the boss, I can make changes.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna challenge your thinking by becoming a follower of Jesus. Jesus set aside his role as king, right? In order to become head servant and bring about transformation. I think the idea that I have to be in control to bring change is totally unbiblical. Yeah. Change comes when I am willing to put myself in any situation, because God was looking for people who he could send to places the church could not control or the synagogue could not control, and to actually have to do things that no synagogue leader or pastor could condone. That's Daniel, Shadrach, Daniel, Esther, all of those stories. The church or the synagogue or the temple could not control what they were to do, but they went as servants to the most wicked government in the world, Babylon.
Right.
And notice 600 years later, that the only ones who showed up at the birth of Jesus, who had any clue that a king was born, were people who happened to come from the same neighborhood of Babylon. I wonder how that happened. I wonder what Daniel did, as Ray would say, Dot, what footnote did he put into some paper astrology that here, the king is going to come when the stars align, and you make sure you follow and find it.
That's right.
Yeah. Please, if you do anything else with theology of work, ownership does not bring transformation. Owners can certainly affect transformation of in the kingdom. But it's not limited. In Joy at Work, my brother Dennis writes that unless you're willing to lose your job for the sake of doing what is right, you will never, ever change a company.
Wow.
Mm.
Yeah.
Because and that included him as the president. And I mean, he lost his job with AES because the board of directors got mad that Enron destroyed the whole sector, and they had to blame it on somebody. So they blamed it on Dennis, and he stepped down from that company. Even though the whole company was based on biblical principles that he had put into the company, that company, and it had tremendous, if you haven't read Joy at Work, it had an amazing impact on what went on. But Dennis had to realize that he could lose his job.
Yeah.
Without question, even though he was, quote, the owner.
Mm.
Yeah. Ownership is not the key to transformation in theology of work.
Mm-hmm.
It's the spirit of when I have a theology of work spirit that says I'm going to go in incarnationally, and I'm going to invest my whole life realizing it could be totally destroyed. But I'm going to plant the seed, or I'm going to be part of the watering process, or I'm going to be part of what God has begun that the next generation can build on. It might not be me that brings about the change, but I can plant the seed, even
Absolutely.
as Daniel did.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, Daniel had to give the kingdom back. He ran the kingdom for what, 7 years? He was in charge. And the king all of a sudden got his senses back. Daniel didn't shoot the king. He gave him back his kingdom. Well, who does that today?
And your name is Daniel.
Yeah.
There's a lot of examples about Daniel here, and your name is Daniel.
And so please, if you can grab a hold of that now in your family. We're going to talk about that in just a minute, but it's the very same thing in the family. It's when the father sets aside his role that was assigned to him by society. You're in charge, and what you do is most important, and your kids there are to support you, and yada yada. Well, however you want to say it. When you set aside that role and say, "I'm here to serve my family. I'm here to bring them to maturity," that's when transformation takes place. That doesn't mean every child is going to come out the way you want them to come out. It might be 10 years or 20 years or 30 years down the line, but you've opened up the door of them becoming what God created them to be.
Right.
And that's what we're trying to get at. The whole purpose of theology of work is not for you to be a success or your church to be a success, but for you to prepare for the next generation.
Well, so Apufia has he has a hand up. I think it's been. So Apufia, Daniel,
Yes,
did you get that? Did you get that whole? Yeah, because it's like a sort of some culture kind of conflict there, but maybe I'm sorry, Apufia, if you look at your children and your wife, also the way you look at yourself in the workplace, as employees, you don't have control. So you discover that what you are running away from, you are also giving it to other people. But let's listen to Apufia. We'll come back to you. I'm very sorry. She's had her hand up for a while now. So Apufia.
My hand is not yet tired. It's still up there. Thank you.
But I'm lowering it now.
A quick comment maybe what Dan is saying about being in charge of the family. Maybe that could also be a problem in as far as theology of work within the family space is concerned. When God told us to go out and dominate, I'm not sure that he was talking about us dominating the family space. The father dominating the wife and the children, but rather what I'm reading in Bakke's article, enabling them. serving them, working to bring them up, not to dominate in that way. But what my hand is up for, I was looking at the 4 basic institutions that were brought up: business, government, church, and family. Could the problem actually be the separation amongst these 4 institutions? We assume that when we are into government and into business, we are working, and that when we are in church and into family, we are not working. And so there is that kind of separation, a different thinking about work when you are positioned in each of these different institutions. And so because of that kind of separation, there is like a negative impact that is felt across the 4 institutions instead of there being an integration. I remember some time back when we are talking about church being integrated in all these. Church is in business, church is in government, church is in family, church isn't separated and standing on its own. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Okay.
Well, I certainly understand they're intermingled. I realize that. In fact, often the church, I grew up in a house church. So my family, almost everybody was family in a house church. There were a few in the community, but we were a very small community, and so we had a house church, and a family was certainly involved in both the gathered and scattered part of the church. I think I fathered 3 children. Two of them are natural born, one was adopted. I have 10 grandchildren. Well, I should say I have 9 grandchildren and 1 great grandchild. I want you to know something. I pastored for 38 years, 35, 36. I think I probably pastored 35 out of the 38 years that I was at the other part. I was just trying to figure out what in the world was going on and why, because it was work. It was the hardest work I've ever done. It was pastoring. Second to parenting, which is the hardest work I will do. And I'll have to do that until I die. My kids just don't grow up. Parenting is work. It is stewarding what is God's. It's not mine. I'm not, I think I've told in the letter, my dad never said he was my father. He never used the word. He said, I'm your dad. You have one father and he's in heaven. Your father will never leave you. He will always be with you. I'm here for a short time stewarding my father's gift, which is you. And so the role in all of these is God is in charge. It's God's kids. It's God's church. It's God's business. It's God's community.
Yeah.
And I'm here to steward it, not to own it. How do I steward? Now the world has given me position because of the sin, actually. Because of the curse, man was put over, and the world lives as if we're cursed. We say, even the people who say there's no religion. I'm not a religious person. We live by the curse. Somebody's dominating somebody else. That is the effect of the curse and of sin. So I live in that world, but I am, as a steward of God, I am to live differently than the curse. And the kingdom does not look like like anything in the U.S. government or anything in the Canadian government or anything in the land of Jamaica, or that's not what the kingdom is. The kingdom is that God is in charge.
Yeah.
and we're stewarding what is God's. And we do that in locations that are under man's control. But I get to do that in the space that he created to bring hope. And that included the business sector, and that included the family sector, and that included the government sector, and that included, all of life. So when I have a lifestyle of theology of work, a lifestyle of God is the owner, I am the steward, and he sends, the role for stewards are to be sent. To be sent to various places in the world to make that world develop to be what God intended it to be. That has not changed from Genesis to Revelation.
Great.
It began in a garden and it ends in a garden. If you understand Revelation 21, 22, it's a garden. And in the middle was the Garden of Gethsemane. So you have three great gardens that go on, and God is very engaged in us stewarding those places.
Great.
Can we move, Doughton, to
Yep.
the family? Because I want to put this at the family level, because this is where most often we don't address it, even though we have more control over it. If you'll go to who am I?
Who am I?
Right.
Okay. Right here.
Yeah. Who am I? Right there. I think it's important that each one of us asks this question: who am I? Who am I to be talking to you about anything? Who am I? When I went to Korea, and this first place we did this was actually at Westminster, and that bastion of evangelical hope for Korea, right, Sunil? That's where,
that's right. Yeah.
That's it. That's right. This was the first place I introduced this in this way, because I am not. I'm the last of the least of this clan. I'm not, I'm not my brother Ray. Now Ray is dying. Doughton hopes to get here before he dies. Ray has been all over the world and knows more about cities of the world and urban theology and than probably anybody in the world. He's been amazing. I'm not Ray. I'm not Denny. Denny had the third largest energy company in the world. He created out of nothing something that has affected from Uganda, where they have plants, and all over the world. They created. Ray came to bring spiritual life, light to the world, and Dennis came to bring physical light to the world. Both passionate about Jesus. My sister Marilyn, my dad said that, you and Ray think you're pretty good as Bible teachers, but you don't hold a candle to your sister Marilyn. Nobody teaches or loves the Bible like Marilyn loves the Bible. Marilyn is now 81. Ray is 83. My brother Denny is 75. Ray is dying of cancer. Dennis is dying of Alzheimer's. And my sister Marilyn has already lost her husband to Alzheimer's, is caring for a son who is dying of cancer. And, our generation is dying. So I'm not any one of those. But if you go on to the next, just keep going on there, each one of them would answer this question differently than I'm going to, because I'm Lowell the younger. I'm the one in the family that I thought I was adopted, because everybody loved me and had a plan for my life. It was, I was there to serve the family, and that was made very clear. The older Ray and the older Marilyn and the older Denny, and then there was the punch bag Lowell. So I'm the other one. But the next slide, they had some hope for me, because Norwegians were skiers. You know, if you were in Korea during the Olympics, Norway just ran away from everybody with their incredible. Well, they said, hey, maybe Lowell can be a skier, you know, like a good Norwegian. But I fell on my face all the time. I mean, I couldn't ski. I ruined my knee as a 5-year-old. I mean, as a fifth grader, so I would have been 9 years old. I was skiing and trying to ski jump, and that was the end of my skiing. You know, by the time I was 9 in the fifth grade. But being the younger, I understand this little story of Jamie. Jamie wanted to be in the school musical. He hoped to be in that play, and his mother feared that he would not because he wasn't very talented. But he came home one day and said, Mom, I made it. I have a new role. They said I was chosen to clap and cheer. And I realized that is the metaphor of my life. I have been chosen to clap and cheer. I used to clap and cheer for my brother Ray. I used to clap and cheer for my brother Dennis. I clapped and cheered even for my sister Marilyn. But my calling from God, because of my place in the family, it's not the same in every family. I'm not saying that at all. But in my particular family, I learned what the value of clapping and cheering. So the next slide, God called me to be a pastor, and my spiritual gift is clapping and cheering. And instead of the church being built around me, what I learned in my family was that I could go places and realize that I could have an impact, but people were going to do it better than I could ever do it. Doughton, the first time I met him, I realized he could teach better than I could ever teach. And if I could clap and cheer for Doughton, he could take theology work around the world, which he has done. How many thousands of people have you taught, Doughton, over the last 15 years? It'd be pretty amazing. Yeah. And there are other Doughtons out there. My job was to find Doughtons and to clap and cheer and to be, when you saw the grace of God, like Barnabas did, to see the grace of God in places where the grace of God is not known to be. Paul went into Corinth and he saw the grace of God. He saw what God was doing among the Gentiles, and he was glad. That's the spirit that God gave to me. So my role as a husband, as a dad, as a pastor, as a community leader, and as now friend of believers around the world, was first to launch my family, then to submit to the dreams of my staff. So my church was not there around my dream. I was there to serve the dreams of the people in my staff. But I taught the staff that they were there to fulfill the dreams of the church body, and to understand what their dreams and visions and gifts were. And they were to build those gifts and dreams and visions. And then to send our people to steward, to teach them how to steward their schools, to steward their businesses, to steward their families. My job was to come alongside a parent who said, "This is my dream." How many of you've done premarital counseling? I required in all my premarital counseling that the husband go to the parents of the bride to be and ask them what their dream was for their daughter. So you have to find out what their dream was for their daughter and come back and say to them, I will help your daughter fulfill your dream. I will become a steward of what you saw in your daughter that made her unique to the other girls in the family, that made her unique to the boys in the family. What did you see in her? How do you teach the old generation, say something about from the old generation is to ask them what they saw, what they hear, what did they feel? And that in marriage became a very important part of the issue. So go to the slide number 24.
24, yeah, here.
Okay.
This is the Korean version. Yeah,
that's
Sunil was
that's
trying
fine.
to, yeah, okay.
My family Ray was totally different than me. And I mean totally different. Ray loved books. From the time he was 3 years old, he was reading. And when he had to leave his house, which was basically a library, he had a library, and his wife was a concert pianist, and they had a room that could hold about 120 people for concerts. And Ray's library held just under 10,000 books in his house. He started reading, and when he'd get in trouble in school, the principal would put him in the book room, and he loved it because he could read everything in the book room. And when he left the school, he saw all the discarded books of the old history books that they were using in generations past, and they put him in the book room. He asked to get them. So he first started collecting books from the room that he was disciplined in because he was a bad boy. He had to go to the book room and sit, and they thought that was punishment. For Ray, he went to heaven every time he went into the book room because he got to read. I have dyslexia. I can't read. I'm totally different in approach. Reading is the most horrific experience for me. For Ray, it was the gift of God. Now, I don't know how God does that. My sister Marilyn, everything was nice and neat and beautiful. She liked to make beauty. She was a beautifier and became a creative designer and an interior designer and had her own business. But she loved the scriptures, and she applied that through the scriptures. She loved to teach. And she was right. She had 3 brothers who were wrong, and she was the sister in the family, and she was always right. She learned how to make decisions because she decided what we would do because she was always right. We were always wrong. And so you grow up in the family. My brother Dennis started his first business at 5 years old, and he had to hire an employee because the employee he bundled kindling. He went and created kindling for fires, and he had to tie the kindling and put a bow in it. So he hired me at 1 penny a bundle to put my finger on the knot so he could tie it up. Now he made, only $2.49 a bundle, and I made a penny, and I should have been really happy. Boy, did we need a human relationship committee then, because
Oh my goodness.
it was bad news what he was doing. The family, we're all so different. Next slide. How did that happen? How does your family become different? How do 4 siblings living at the same time, raised in the same context, nurtured by the same family, filled with the same spirit, has such a different experience of passions, gifts, callings, and ministry? How does that happen? Is that a gift, or is it just naturally happen? I don't think so. I'd like you to meet my mom and dad. Next slide, please. The reason it happened was because of these 2 who came from immigrant families. Both of their families migrated into the US, and they were poor immigrant family. My mom never finished high school. She only had a 9th grade education. And my dad finished 1 year of post-high school and then had to come home because of the Depression and in the United States in the 1930s and in World War II, could not go on to school. He wanted to be a missionary, but he couldn't. And he had to help take care of his family's farm. And so he was raised in this immigrant family. But what my mom did without education and what my dad did without education was they learned to become stewards of the womb. And I think this is something that we do not teach parents. Because in the Old Testament, what happened in the womb often was one brother attacking another brother. You remember that story of the holding on to the heel of one? This fight goes on in the womb, and the rest of the story is a war zone. The next slide, please. My mom understood this text, that each child was created in her womb by God, and it was a breathtaking experience. Each one of the children were uniquely created. She didn't hear it from the pulpit. She didn't hear it from some professor. She understood intuitively that I was different than Ray and Marilyn and Denny, and her job was to help me and then help Denny and then help Ray become whatever they could become. And that meant launching them and sending them instead of keeping them at home during troubled times and saying, you got to work for us. They sent us away because they knew their job was to raise their children and launch them into the world. And that was the heart of my dad and the heart of my mom. Keep going. Here's the next right here. Here is what my mom did. We ended up with 22 foster children in our home. Mom was on her knees playing with every one of them. She recognized through watching them the gifts that they had. She had the ability to see that this one did this well, and she worked at helping us understand what our strengths were, not what our weaknesses were. It didn't bother her that I couldn't read. I had other strengths that she sent me to. So I was a camp counselor from the time I was in the 5th grade on. Every summer I went out and worked in camps. Mom knew intuitively that I was going to be a pastor. Not because of some great, we were so small, we didn't have pastors. But she thought that I would become a pastor because of the way I worked with people. And she thought Denny was going to be a businessman because of when he left our home, he had more money, he had made more money, and he had more money in the bank than my parents ever did in their life. By the time he was a 17-year-old kid, he built out of that. I'm saying this because if you go down to go to 2 slides, by the time we were 10 years old, by the time we were 10 years old, each of us basically knew what we were gifted to do, called to do. And not only did my parents do that, but we were in a public school system. It wasn't Christian, it wasn't private, it was just the run-of-the-mill public school system. But my first grade teacher, I didn't see this when I was in the first grade, because it was a report card sent to my parents in it'd be about March of my first grade experience. We didn't have kindergarten, so first grade was my first year of school. And my first teacher, by the name of Mrs. Jacoby, wrote on the back of the report card to my parents on how Lowell was doing. Said, I had high hopes for Lowell academically, but he has discovered that basketball is the most important thing in the world to him. I was 6 years old. Little did I know that basketball was going to be the vehicle that God was going to use to not only take me to the world, but change the way I pastored and change the way I fathered, because it became a coach rather than an owner, one who wanted to bring the most out of people. And so my parents, through the church that I was in, a little Sunday school, it was American Sunday School Union, we had no pastor, but the church helped us do what Max Dupree said, find our voice and then find the touch, the competency in which you're going to use that voice. And my parents worked with our church, our little community church. One of the problems I have with the large church in America and around the world is that children are never given the opportunity to find their voice and to develop their touch, because you have experts doing everything. You have singers who come in who are totally gifted. I was in a Sunday school where the worship leader was a girl my age. So from the time when I finished the sixth grade, I became the Sunday school teacher for the kids 4 to 6. A girl became the Sunday school superintendent and ordered all of the supplies for Sunday school. And another one became the worship leader. And her job was to call all the little children in the church and say, what hymn are you learning in your piano lessons this week? And that hymn became the song, and the child played the hymn and the girl led the hymn. And that's how we developed voice. That's how we developed skill. And they sent us into our schools to develop those schools. We didn't have a youth group because we were so small. We didn't have enough youth. So we had to form a youth group at the local high school. And we formed a Youth for Christ club at the high school, introduced it to our county, brought it in. 35 years later, I did the 35th anniversary of Youth for Christ in Whatcom County. It started because our little church trusted 7th grade kids to develop their voice, develop their touch. I preached in my little church before I left there often. Why? I didn't have the training. They went to the schools, athletics became important, basketball became the thing. That basketball became the vehicle to take me to Korea and the whole process. But it started with the integration of a parent, of a church, of working with not what you don't have, but what you do have, which was a school system, teaching us how to be stewards in that school system, to be servants there. My mom at 85, this is her 85th birthday, and she just retired that day. That was her final day of as an employee, the oldest employee in Safeway in the United States. she was there helping others find their role in their life while she was serving the public, taking groceries out to put it in people's trunks. She was a grocery lady. I can't tell you enough how we need pastors to help mothers and dads understand their job is to find in their kids their gifts. Find a dream with them. What could you do? My mom was with dementia. My daughter is on the right of this picture, the shortest one. My daughter cared for my mom when I was there 17 hours a day while she was in dementia. The last 3 years of her life, I was there 17 hours a day. And then on the weekends, I would go work with church. I was working on a doctorate. I was working with churches, old and dying churches, and doing research and things. And so my daughter would come. She was 16 years old at the time and troubled. She was dealing with being adopted. Where's my family? What's my role in life? How do I fit in? My mom in dementia helped my daughter discover her gifts as a nurse and as a caring person. And actually, my daughter changed her college degree without telling us because of what my mom in dementia encouraged her to be, because of the gifts she saw in her. Dad understood that the family had to work together. And so the Mustard Seed Foundation came out of the family, and the last thing he said to me was, Lowell, you've got to make your brother Dennis listen to Ray about missions, and your brother Ray listen to Dennis about business. And I laughed. I said, I'm the youngest one. They're not going to listen to me. They love me and have a plan for my life. They're not going to listen to anything I say. That was in 1990. I had no clue that theology of work was going to come into existence. And the last 15 years of my life has been basically putting Ray and Dennis together, like Humpty Dumpty, putting the two of them together in one space, one called to business and one called to the a business and the marketplace, and one called to the church and the mission of urban settings of the world. One called to power, one called to the powerless. One worked in the White House, one wanted to picket the White House at the same time. Why? Because God, in this little Norwegian immigrant family, had parents who could see that they were stewarding God's children. It wasn't because we had no money. It wasn't because of position and education, because we had none. It was because they understood and were willing to set aside their role in order for their kids to become everything God called them to become. Let me just close with this, and then you can ask any questions you want. 10 days before Dad died, he discovered he was sick and had pancreatic cancer, and 10 days later, he died. The last conversation I had with him the day that he found out he had pancreatic cancer, not knowing that he was going to die, because he had been sick 3 days in his life. He had missed 3 days of work in his entire life. And he said, I said, Dad, do you have any unfinished business? Do you have any dreams that haven't been fulfilled? He said, oh, I had 4 dreams in my life. So what dreams did you have? Because he never talked about his dreams. He said, I always wanted to be a missionary. But because of the war and because of depression, I couldn't go. But he had just spent a good portion of a year traveling with my brother Ray through his missionary journeys into the Middle East. And he said, you know, I could never have been the kind of missionary your brother Ray is. Then he said, I always wanted to give to the poor. I said, Dad, you are poor. You've been poor all your life. He said, I know, I've always wanted to give to the poor. And he did. That's why we had foster children. That's why everything about him was giving to the poor. He said, but you know, I could never have given to the poor what your brother Denny has given. He gives away more in a day than I have made in a lifetime through the Mustard Seed Foundation. Then he said, I always wanted to be a Bible teacher. That's when he said, now you and Ray think you're pretty good as pastors and Bible teacher, but you don't hold a candle to your sister Marilyn. Nobody loves her Bible. I go anywhere in the world to listen to Marilyn teach the Bible. I saw a pattern there, and there was a fourth kid. I said, Dad, what was your other dream? I always wanted to be a basketball player because I always thought basketball could be used to tell people about Jesus. Then he said to me, Lowell, I've watched your sons. My sons now, one's 45, one's 48. But at that time, they were high school kids. He said, your sons have led more people to Jesus playing basketball in their lifetime than I've led to Jesus in my entire lifetime. His dreams were fulfilled not by him, but by the generations that have followed him. That's the message we need to get to parents. It's not about you. It's about those you leave behind. As Jesus said, you're going to do greater things when I'm gone than I was ever able to do while I'm here. And I realized it was because he was sending the Spirit. But he said it to a bunch of lunkhead fishermen. Shouldn't every parent be able to say that to his loving children? Shouldn't every pastor be able to say that to his people? Shouldn't every business owner be able to say that? It's connecting the dots. The church, family, the sectors of society, the governments, business. Here's my family at my dad's funeral. If you looked at this as in 1990, if you went to today, there would be 4 African Americans in that family picture. There would be my nieces and nephews have married Hispanics. They've married people from Asia. It's a white Norwegian family here. But Dad's dream was the world. The world he wanted to go to. That world has now come to his own family. That's what the kingdom is about. Questions, comments?
Harry, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a question from what you wrote in the paper. You I think it's on top of page 6, says, I believe we should follow the same path that the curse took after the fall. When I was reading that, the question I had was, are you prescribing or suggesting a kind of a linear process to repairing those things? Or was that just how you laid it out kind of in thought?
Explain a little bit more.
Yeah. Because you said we should start with the transformation of husband and wives.
Oh, yes.
Next, move on to parents and continue on to bosses and workers. So you're saying, was that like a linear process? And yeah, that was.
We've done just the opposite. The church has applied the gospel to, say, racial issues, to apartheid. Apartheid, but they haven't haven't applied it at all to the gender issues in the family. Why? It started in the family. The problem started at the root. Start at the root, not at the end. Yes, I think we need to absolutely go back and start at the beginning and say, this is where it began, in the family. Then apply it to the family, then apply it to the church, then apply it to business and the government and the other sectors of the world.
Wow.
But until you see it in the church, because you see it in the family, it's never going to bring transformation.
Wow. Did I answer your question, Harry? Yeah, because
Yeah. It's I found that I think I found that to be true. The hardest group to work with for me in the work that I do is with Christians, with churches, and particularly pastors. They don't want to admit that they have work to do.
Yeah.
And because we've
I use that phrase, and I encourage you to use it because I think it speaks. We have an Old Testament, a New Testament cross that gets us ready for heaven, and an Old Testament lifestyle that keeps us controlled on earth.
Wow.
Under somebody else's control. Until we change the lifestyle in the family and we make dads stewards and moms stewards of the family, not owners of the family. And their job is to unleash and send their kids to their callings, not serve the parent. When that happens, you'll begin to see things take place.
Thanks, Lowell. Henry.
Thank you, Dr. Dot, but also Dr. Bakke. I followed your presentation, and thank you so much for sharing about your family. Great examples, and it has taken me now kind of like to reflect more on my family. We have 3 kids. Israel is 10, and the middle one, Pendro, is 5. I 6. Then the last one, Aliko, she's going to be 5 next week. And I've been kind of like asking more questions, like when I look at them and what they love, and at the same time as a parent, knowing that in 10 years, probably even less than 10 years, they may have chosen kind of like their path. And listening now from you, I don't think it will take even 10 years for them to choose their path. I'm from Africa, and most of the times when you go to school, the expectation of the parents is that, okay, I want him to start work, to do well, and to take care of the family, extended family in this case. Myself, the one who supported me was my uncle, my 2 uncles, to the point of going to college. Now, the question I would like to ask, I would have asked that to your parents. At what point, or what are some of the things, apart from praying with the kids, is it only observing, whereby you see what God has gifted each and every child, and you want to help them according to the gift, so that they become what God prepared them to become? And there are moments when kids, they love so many different things, like so many things. Are there some of the things that as a parent I can look at and I can help my children, and they realize what they'll become? And the other question is, in the same way, we know that children learn from parents, and your parents wanted to be, your dad wanted to be a missionary, but he realized that he has realized that through generation. So he didn't actually become a missionary himself, but really. So how can the 2 are learning from what I do, but at the same time they are gifted, and I need to help them to become what God purposed.
Yeah.
Can you pick out what he's saying, Lowell?
Yeah,
The-
let me
the
start
connection
with,
is a bit, yeah.
yeah, let me start with the first part, Henry, and I know you broke up a little bit, but that's okay. Let's start with,
If my question is
yeah.
Just go ahead, Lowell. I think it's breaking up.
My when my mom understood that my brother Denny, she began to see this business skill inside of Denny. Remember, mom had no education. We had no preschools, and so when she was 5 years, or when Dennis was 5 years old, mom took Dennis to the grocery store, which was 32 miles away. We were way out in the country. Once a week, they went to the grocery store. And in the town of Bellingham, which was where we could get food, and they would make a list, and mom would with Dennis would say, okay, what kind of things should we get for the groceries from the grocery store, and they would write a list. Then they went in and she taught my brother how to find the cheapest one of the list. And he would go get it. Then they brought the groceries back to the house, and they formed a store that Dennis was the owner of. And mom had to buy the groceries back from Dennis. Okay, 5 years old, mom's created a store in our own house so Dennis would learn how to handle business. No moms do this, right? But mom saw that inside of Dennis. Dennis then, when mom said, I need some ketchup, I have to go to the store, and they figure out, Dennis couldn't write anything. He hadn't learned how to write yet, but he had to know what the cost was. So he had to memorize, he had to learn how to memorize, and he could memorize lists. I mean, mom was helping him become a major company business owner. A 40 billion cap business was started at 5 years old was what my mom did. My dad built me, when I was in the second grade, a basketball court outside, and he actually put a light on it out in the middle of the woods, because we lived out in the middle of the woods. And the basketball court was domed, the dirt, so the water would run off, because in Washington it rains all the time. So I learned how to dribble in a muddy basketball court, and learned how to shoot at night with a light, because dad saw that I had a love for basketball. Mom with Marilyn, seeing that she had this design capability, they would work together to pick up. We lived in a shack, and literally a shack that went down the river in a flood. It was an old shack, and every time a child was born, they'd add a little lean-to on the side so that we'd have another space for another child. And we had 4 rooms, and it was the goofiest looking house in the world, because it was a shack. But that shack was beautiful, because mom and Marilyn designed that house to look beautiful, and it was always nice and neat, which is the thing on my mom's tombstone. Dad was good and faithful servant. Mom was nice and neat. She wanted when the house went down the river, the next house was a chicken coop. Literally, we moved to a chicken coop, and mom and Marilyn cleaned the chicken coop. And by the end of the day, they had 35 people there for dinner, who had helped us move and help us take things out of the river so we'd be safe. Why did she do that? Because she saw that Marilyn had that capacity, and she began to build it. She didn't know she was going to become an interior designer. She just knew that she had those gifts, and she trusted the gifts of her children and empowered them to do those gifts early. And because our Sunday school and our church was small, we did the same things in our church. We didn't have a pastor. We didn't have a lot of youth, but we didn't have a youth pastor. My youth pastor was 93 years old. We go there every
Oh
now
my
this is,
goodness,
I'm dead certain there were 3 of us in the youth group, quote unquote. We would go
93.
every Friday night to Royer, who was 93-year-old.
Oh my goodness.
He used to be a boxer, heavyweight boxer,
Oh my goodness.
and worked on the railroad. So you can tell what kind of a gruff guy he is. That was our youth group. I sang at his funeral. He died. And the next youth director was Henry Funk, who was 71. And he taught the Sunday school class. I was still, we would meet with him. He died in 9 months, and I sang at his funeral. And then there was none left. It was just us. So we had a 93-year-old model, a 71-year-old model, and then it was just the 3 of us.
Oh my goodness.
But we were engaged. We were counted on. And we don't have that today.
Yeah.
If churches would take seriously their children's callings, their passions, their gifts, it wouldn't be about what the youth director says. It would be about the youth director who's finding out what is it that you do well. And I'll be at every event that you do. I'm at your school play. I'm at your school this. How do you teach them how to serve their teachers at school? That's their world. How do you send them to school to be a servant at that school? That's what the church should be doing. And then they should be reporting back. How did it go this week? Where did God show up at school this week? They should realize that in this young age, how many heroes in the Bible were children? We teach them as little Bible stories, not as active members of how God works. He works through children.
Wow.
Children transform people way faster than adults do.
Great. Yeah, this is, yeah, I think, Henry, this is very, because of the culture where we find ourselves, that is kind of top down. And I think about a few weeks ago, somebody asked a question from the Korean team about, the difference between, this sort of system where, you have to, the culture is very patriarchal. And we're not sort of downplaying patriarchy here, but we are defining the role of the patriarch.
Yeah.
It's not trying to live his life through the sons and daughters, but trying to actually see what is it that God has put in the sons and daughters so that he can steward it. This is so critical. This cuts across culture, whether it's Caucasian, whether it's African, whether it's Asian or whatever. It's just biblical. Jesus died for us. He gave his life for us. So we also need to do that for those that we claim to be mentoring, those who are our proteges. That's I really wanted to emphasize that, because what we are talking about here is it's actually biblical. It's not limited to one kind of culture. It's just human. It's just human. Yeah. Because in Africa, we want the kids to do what we like. We like to use our kids to brag. My son is a medical doctor. Maybe he doesn't even want to do that. But a lot of them, we've done the survey here in my city where over 75% of kids in university, they are reading courses they never plan to read. They're reading courses that their parents want them to read. They're reading courses that society places a high value on, not something that, in fact, in the medical college here in Jos, there's a sizable percentage of them suffering mental health challenges because they can cope. They are on that. When medical students now begin to, grapple with mental health, that society is in trouble because they are reading courses that they don't have the aptitude, the love, the passion for because of societal pressure, which starts from the home. Alan.
Yeah. Preach, doctor, preach.
Thanks.
Daniel, can
Alan. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, Daniel, about if I were the owner, if I were
Yep.
I could own this. I hope you can see the joy that my dad had when he never owned anything in his life other than a house that he built by his own hands out in the middle of nowhere. Very much like a fellow. You heard this guy in the Bible by the name of Elijah? Where was Elijah from? Elijah was what?
Tishbite.
Tishbite. Where in the world is Tishbe? Anybody ever heard of Tishbe?
No GPS coordinates.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. Dad came from Norway to a place called Saxon that he treated as if it were heaven. He loved that place. He worked 3,000 miles away because there was no work around this little neighborhood. We were in a little place. It was so small you had to go outside to change your mind. I mean, it was 9 people if you counted the cat and dog who lived in there. There still is no incorporated city in the school district that I grew up in. The largest area school district in the state of Washington, and there's not one incorporated town in it.
Wow.
Everything is so rural, it's just crazy. But that's where God finds leaders. And he finds them because they're entrusted, empowered. We as a church need to steward what we have, not what we don't have.
Yeah.
We have children. We have dads have their kids and their wives. How do you steward them? You've been given position in the world because of the sin, problem. How do you step out as a cross and set aside to take this little thing here, and where they end up? Dad never dreamt that his son would have the largest private energy company in the world.
Wow.
We had one line that cost thousands of dollars to get a line because we never had electricity in our house until that line was put in. And every time the wind blew, it would go down. We'd have to put it back up. We have electricity. And yet Dennis was taking electricity where did he learn about electricity? In a place where there was none, in Saxon, Washington, where we grew up.
Wonderful. Alan. Alan, yeah, you're on.
Well, I just want to echo one point that I recently had a discussion with my mentor Jeremy Gui, and then there was a point that was exactly what we have discussed is because of the old way of teaching, we develop leadership, but not leader. We develop leadership because we develop a model of how to lead, but we actually don't have the capacity to grow a leader, which is exactly what Dr. Bakke has been saying. You have to bring out the essence of a person. You don't teach them the model of, this is what you do, but it's actually what your strength is. I think that's sum up of my conversation with my mentor a few weeks ago, and that really inspired me, and it's corresponding to what you have said tonight. My question is more toward, if I may, your church.
Yes.
I read on. I love your article. I mean, like everything you say in your article, I want to reflect it again and again. You talk about we look through the cross. We should live like the plan A. Because of the cross, we can live as a plan A. Okay, so come back to your church. I would love to look at your church worship, but I couldn't find it because I couldn't find any online worship of your church. So I wonder what is your church worship is like. The reason why I asked that is because you touch on generation gap. I think in a lot of church worship, when if I my definition of worship in here is the corporate worship. I'm talking about the Sunday worship. There are a big issue on intergeneration worship because of music style differences that create a lot of discrepancy and different ideas. So I would like to know more about your church. I was fascinated to know about the interactive preaching. I never come across that from coming from an Asian background. So
Yeah.
I would like to have a glimpse of your worship because I'm a worship leader. So yeah, and the
Okay, let me,
intergeneration gap
how do you,
in worship.
how do you select your staff? My staff, my worship leader had 1 year of, one semester of college. And but when I met him, the first church I was in was the small dying church, and had been through a split. It was a teenage church that had been through a split, and it was in horrible shape. And we only had one. When I came, there had about 5 or 6 women who were very good musicians. But we were to plant, the church was next to IBM. You know, you've all heard about IBM. It says, I've been moved. That's what it means. I've been moved. Well, IBM at that point in time was moving people at drop of the hat. And in one weekend, I lost about 40% of my church because they moved the people from Boulder, Colorado, where I was at, down to Arizona. And all of my musicians, my choir, everything was gone in one weekend. And I had a 12-year-old girl left. The only one who had any music experience was a 12-year-old girl. I went to visit a fellow who came to the church just visiting, and I discovered that he loved music. And, you know, he just had become a Christian. He didn't know anything. But I said, would you come and help me? You know, I need somebody because we've lost all of our music people. I just have a 12-year-old girl. Well, he didn't even know hymns. He was just totally, you know, new. But what I discovered was he understood what it was to find gifts in people. And that 12-year-old girl became a hero in our church, went on to get her master's degree, and now has an international ministry in Ukraine, of all places, with her husband through music. Well, in our little church at that point, he started looking around and finding all of these kids who did these things and finding a parent who did this. And he had the ability to make them sing. And he started doing dramas, and we started adding all of these things into our worship that none of the people who came out of Moody Bible Institute or some music school would have ever thought of. We by the time he was 10 years with me in one church, and then when we went to the last church in Boulder that we're in Puyallup, Washington, he became the person who found all of these kids and began to nurture their gifts. And the first thing we did is said, your calling is not to Bethany, our church. Your calling is to your school. You're to lead that school. So the first year, you're going to become a servant to your teachers. What is it you like to do? Well, I like athletics. Okay, then you become a servant in that athletic department. We taught them about servanthood. We taught them how to look and to serve the people around them. Then the second year, they learned a little bit about structures of how does servanthood work in a structure. It's leadership, but it's the structure. How do you work within it? The third year, we expected that they would become leaders in organizations on their campus, and the goal was not come to church. The goal was how do we send you? What do you need to be effective where you are? we never dreamt that we wanted people to come to church. Our dream was we wanted people to go from church.
That's right.
And to steward. And children were the one. In fact, the first ordination service we had was for 13 children in grade school, where we had ordained them to be pastors or laid hands on to be pastors of their schools. And our deacon board had to go visit the pastors in their schools. So they were going to first graders and second graders and third graders and having lunch and saying, how are you doing today? What do you need to help serve the school?
Absolutely.
It's a lifestyle that it's not about you all come, it's about how you go.
Exactly.
And so we had 4 high schools in our school district of 2,000 in each high school. There were 4 of them, 1 private Christian school and 3 public schools. And in one year, it dawned on us, every student body president in each of those schools were from our church. Was there a reason for that? Yeah. Because they were taught as freshmen how to serve. And they were taught as sophomores how to love the place that you're in.
Yeah.
And then they were told whether you come back to church is not as important as that you report back how you're doing so we can support you in your leadership there. Well, in 3 years, the youth group went from 13 people to over 250. Not because we ever did anything to invite. It was because we sent kids and by the way, when kids came to Christ, the ones who led them to Christ baptized them. I didn't baptize people. Those who had the spiritual influence in their lives, we wanted to build that relationship. I could not find anything that said in the Bible that the pastor should be doing the baptism.
Exactly.
We want the kids to live for Christ outside, but we don't give them any power inside the church.
Absolutely.
I wanted them to have power inside the church. I wanted them to use their gifts in our gathered setting as well as in the scattered. Didn't want to expect them to do something that we didn't trust them to do when we were all gathered together.
Fantastic.
So kids sang, they led worship, they did things just like other adults, because our goal was to raise people up, and they reported back on how they were doing.
Thank you so much.
You can't find this. I'm not having pastored there for 15 years. When I left the church to go to the seminary and to work in the seminary, but the process, that's what the process was.
Great. Alan, I hope you because you and I, we've had this conversation about worship, and now if you read between the lines, you can see the way Lowell has addressed your question.
I have one question.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
Okay, your worship today, the definition of worship today, we need to widen it, because I know the question you're asking is about the music content of worship, but you see that even the music today should remind the people of the need to go. You know, your lyrics, your genre, your whatever, it should be crafted in such a way that it's a challenge, it's a reminder for people to go. Because I have, mentored Christian artists over the years, and I discovered that the music that we craft is kind of very vertical, right? We sing to ourselves. The horizontal part of it is not there. Nobody sings about the crime in the city. Nobody sings about the racial challenges. We just singing glory, 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 glory. Everything is just, and then, so we need to be singing. There was a youth group that I spoke to years ago in Dallas, and I asked them, do you have friends who are not Christian? They said, yes. Your friends who are not Christian, do they have music of the likes of Don Moen or maybe having Slaughter? They said, no. Do you have the music of Jay-Z on your own iPod? They say, yes. I said, so how come the music of Jay-Z can cross to church and the church music can't cross to the world? There is a fundamental problem with that. So your worship, just like the sermon, just like the whole order of service should remind people, should remind believers of the need to go, not to come. That's the point I believe Lowell was trying to, because if I've allowed Lowell to go to that story where he had to go to his board to ask them for vacation. And the reason he wanted to go on vacation was to go and coach his son, for basketball, which falls on the same day as Bible study. So coaching his son to play basketball and pastoring the church was the same. So this is something we have to really roll up our sleeves and really do, because that's the configuration of the church, biblically speaking. Suni, you wanted to say something? Sorry.
Yes, I'm asking a question on behalf of one student.
Okay.
Thanks for sharing your story, which greatly touched his heart, and in particular, he learned how important it is to have a stewardship for the pastor to have, especially for his or her own families and children. And he's also he's also moved that the pastor's own stewardship is to clap and cheer and others, and which is critically important.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, in Korea, people in the workplace outside the church, outside the ministry of church, it seems don't seem receiving proper encouragement and the acknowledgement. So he thinks that this is because of Confucianism or shamanism, which has been dominant in the minds of Koreans. So with such existing dominant worldviews in mind, what would you suggest that we need to do first in order to apply the theology work into our context? For example, pastor's education or Bible school for parents or anything else?
Well, the first thing that I think that we need to understand is that does Psalm 139 still work today? Is that still viable? In my mother's womb, does God still work in wombs today? If that's the case, does he work in shamanist wombs? Are children created in Hindu families created in the image of God? We have so Christianized, and we've said, yeah, Christians are made in the image of God, but we forget that all men were made in the image of God. So what we need to do is to start our discussion with people on the marketplace and find out what part of them. I believe sin it affects all of mankind. I understand that, but sin is not more powerful than the image of God. Sin does not destroy the image of God in a person. God doesn't start working his image when you become a believer. He is working there in you. Way before I acknowledged Jesus as my Lord and Savior, he was at work in me, in his image in me was at work in me. He was calling me, he was preparing me. What I needed to do as an adult was to recognize that God was already at work. He was started in the womb before I ever became a believer. My womb, my mother's womb was as tarnished with sin as any other womb in the world. Yeah. But God was at work there. And so we need to recognize that the image of God, and a part of that image is we were created in his image to be workers. And so what I encourage our business people to do is not to say, I will get close to somebody who becomes a Christian, but I want to discover what's inside of my employee that really gives them passion. Absolutely. So my brother Dennis built a company based upon the fact that every employee in that company was created in the image of God. And they had a passion. God had given them skills and passions. And his job as the CEO of that company was to discover what those gifts were. And he went and visited every plant in their whole system. Every year he traveled to every plant, interviewed every person, that everybody had to write a review of their own life as part of this. He read literally 30,000 plant reviews every year. He went into his office. There was a questionnaires every year from every employee to discover what their gifts and passions and desires were. And the reason that their company grew was he followed the visions and plans of his people, not the visions that he did for his company. He discovered where their passions were. He treated them as God would treat them. They recognized he was doing it because he was a believer and follower of Jesus. But they understood he cared for them personally, and he trusted their gifts, and they trusted he believed in us. He believed that we could do something, and he said it was because we were like God in that we had God's skills and God's vision, and this made sense. So I would say that the way to go back into this world in shamanism and any other is not to condemn the religion, but to find where God is already at work in that. I believe God's image is still working in Hinduism. And so why is it that Doughton and we have one of our teaching team by the name of Fletcher Tink, who has taught theology work inside of Muslim centers, Hindu temples, he's taught it in all sorts of places, because he recognizes God is already there. His image is already there. He's already at work. There's no place he's not at work. My job is to discover what looks like him and to build relationships with them. So when you do that and you build trust, then you can get into what about sin? What about, well, yeah, sin's very real. Jesus came to die for that sin. You can have the conversation. People can come to Christ, but they'll not come to Christ unless you see that God is already at work there. You're not coming to save them. You're coming to partner with the work that's already going on there. If you think that your church is going to bring Christianity into shamanism, you're wrong. Christ is already at work through his spirit in every location, in every denomination, in every religion of the world, every people. His spirit is where his image is there. Our job is to find it, get excited about it, build relationships with it, and just see what God does. It doesn't start with what Campus Crusade used to say, God loves you and has a wonderful plan for your life, but law too is you're all sinners. We need to start with Genesis 1 and 2. The cross has made it possible for us to think in terms of God being.
I didn't know. All right.
Does that make sense?
So do you need time to voice something to the person who asked the question?
I tried my best to.
Okay.
translate.
Sorry. All right. Yeah, because there's so much in there, and we can actually get back to this recording, and I'm sure the recording captured it. Your translations, so they can actually.
By the way, Doughton, can I just stress this?
Yep.
Your worship service should be a reporting service. Every Sunday, there should be reports from the marketplace, from the family, from wherever, here's how God showed up.
Yeah.
Because worship is not singing.
Yeah.
Worship is at our work. And God showed up in our worship.
Yeah.
So to have children, teachers, business leaders, government officials,
Perfect.
reporting is critical to how you worship. And you will not know the one person who's going to touch that child and open up a whole new world for them.
Yeah.
Pastor's not going to do that. They're going to identify with people who have similar type of callings that they have.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Lowell. Yeah, we're really on top of the hour, and we should be rounding off. Any other maybe comment, question, or takeaways today? Something you just want the class to benefit from? And I'm going to ask, I don't know if Marcia is here. All right, I was going to call you to help us give like a vote of thanks to Lowell by the time it's done, but you have your hands up already. What's your question, Marcia? All right.
Good morning. Actually, I just wanted to say thank you.
Okay.
I wanted to say thank you so much. I don't know if it's a vote of thanks, but this was deeply impactful for me. Dr. Bakke, sharing about your family and the impact and connecting it so much to the Word of God and reminding us that the Lord has put us here to be stewards. And so this has been powerful. It's been a joy to read your work and to now hear you and just see how God has really used your family to really infiltrate and permeate so many aspects of society, and so many have been impacted that it's truly, truly been a pleasure. So for me, having 2 children of my own, it's just really, really reminded me so deeply as to how do I continue, even though they're 18 and 25, how do I be stored? How do I help them to continue to find their gift? And I think in some ways it reminded me that my mom, who never been to college, has I think like a 7th grade or 6th grade education, but has done some different courses in home economics and stuff like that. But how much she has impacted our family. And a big reason for me being in this class is actually because of her, directly connected to her, and her always encouraging me to do this. And so my mom is now has dementia, living with dementia. Wow. And so, yes, and so a big part of why, in the last few months, I decided to really pursue this was being reminded of that vision she had for me. And I knew it was in myself, and it was just fear and everything else holding me back from that. And so what she didn't get to do, in my mind, it's not a burden to me. It's something I want to do. I want to be able to live that out. So to hear you talk about, how through our kids, that vision and that stewardship and God's work can continue, and it not be, because sometimes it is a burden, like kids make it, parents make kids do things or influence them in a particular way, as opposed to seeing the gift and working alongside that gift and helping them to bring out that gift. So it really helped me also in terms of my own journey and reflecting and that reminder that this is not a burden and this is part of God's work. So thank you so much. I've been truly, truly impacted and blessed. So I appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marcia. That's exactly what I was expecting. I wanted you to just help us say thank you to Dr. Bakke for coming, and then thank you so much for the way you just tied all that together. So I'm going to ask, if there's no other question, I'm going to ask Daniel to close us in prayer, today.
May I just say, if any of you have any further questions or comments, Dalton can give you my email or yeah, I do best with email because I'm old. I can't handle it. Anyway, I'd be happy to dialogue with you through Skype or whatever. I know that's outdated too, but I did master Skype. So anyway, I'd be happy to have any other further conversations.
Thank you so much, Lowell. Thank you very, very much. So if there's no other, Suni, you have anything to say?
Oh, no, yeah, it's great hearing from Lowell again. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Good to see you, Sunil.
Yeah.
Great. So Daniel, you want to close us in prayer? Daniel Lim. Not
Yep, okay.
Daniel. All right. Yes.
Yes, that's right.
All right.
Lord, thank you for this evening. Thank you for this time for today. And I'm sure that as we all are quite blessed to have Dr. Bakke for tonight. And we are so thankful that you have taught us through him. And so now when we return to our workplace, then bless us to implement what we believe and what we learned today. And also, I want to prepare for Dr. Bakke for his ministry and for his life. Help us to continue to have a positive impact and biblical impact on people around him, not only around him, but also around the world. And also, please bless my colleagues and bless brothers and sisters in this group. So and help us to continue to grow in Christ, in knowledge in Christ. And thank you for this evening. Thank you so much. I pray in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you very much, everyone. And so the class
Thank
for
you.
this week we open on Monday so that we can continue our exercises. Our last content session will be next Saturday. And then the upper Saturday will be our presentations. By next Saturday, I'll give us details about that presentation. Thank you very much, Lowell, again. And then I'll see you soon, very, very soon.
Yes, a couple of days.
All
Okay.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye.
All right, Dr. Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.